So without further ado, let's get started. So what are we going to cover today? So we're going to cover kind of three things from a very high level. Shifts in the design and attendee expectations. That'll be kind of an intro, a little bit of a prep area where I'll talk a little bit about industry-wide kind of things that we've seen, things that are exciting, ideas that you might want to take and use for yourself. And then we'll get into designing meetings as experiences. So that's where a lot of Susanna's work is going to come in because going from the shift of attendee expectations and then, okay, well, how do we apply that to designing things differently? So we'll talk a lot about that there. And then finally, kind of where David comes in is measuring an ROI. So when you're having these kind of like technology enabled events, there's a lot to track. There's kind of so much data that you're not really sure where to look or how to make sense of it all. So we have great slides on what are some core things that you could be looking at, how should you be thinking about them, probably more importantly, how could you be talking about them to your team or the stakeholders that you're planning and managing events for. So those are going to be some of the things that we'll cover today, and that's like the high level, but we have plenty of slides, so there'll be a lot more than that. So I think one of the things that people always think about is, how is my current audience, how is my audience aging, is my audience young, or maybe if you're, a third party and you plan events for people across the board, you're dealing with multiple generations at a time. And I think like any kind of generation, everyone loves to say millennials love X or these people love Y, and there's different preferences between the different populations. And technology is a really easy target where everyone's like the younger people like technology, and the older attendees don't. And I think what we're going to focus on is probably a little less around technology, a little more around just like general kind of ideologies, general trends and shifts in the industry that what we're seeing works. And so we'll try to focus there. So let's dive into that topic a little bit. So one of the things, not a surprise for you, this is not a unique data point, it's more of just something that is important to say out loud so we can think about it, is that, millennials becoming decision makers, I think most people, when they see that, they might think, okay, millennials are decision makers when it comes to maybe planning some events. But I think the interesting lens that not everyone thinks about is they're also, becoming the people that are making the decisions to host the event. They're making decisions on what the goals of the event are. They're making the decisions on what the vision for the conference or event might be. And so not only are the attendees, millennials, and they're kind of pushing decision making from an attendee standpoint, they're also now on the business side. They're now the ones, potentially a lot of you that are on the webinar today actually making decisions from an execution standpoint, which I think is a really unique perspective. I think before people said, this is what millennials want at conferences, this is how to engage young people at a conference. And now we kind of need to get into this world where they're actually making the decisions across all parts of the business, which is an interesting shift in perspective, I think. And so one of the things that we've seen across different conferences and just the general mindset that we'll get into some more specific examples later is that, making agendas something that can be personalized is really important to people. I think the, planners are turning to things like live polling, helping take the feedback directly from the crowd, make decisions, make changes. I'm sure you've heard of conferences where they're getting real-time feedback on presentations, and then maybe they're running another presentation that went great the first day, they're running it again. South by Southwest is a good example of being very dynamic, and that's one of those things where the agenda kind of makes it hard. If you're going to print that out and you're going to change it often, that doesn't really work. But if you have the right technology, you can do things to understand which events were the most highest attended, which ones had the most engagement. Okay, let's do something around that again, and you can be really flexible and make that event really dynamic rather than kind of just going down the line from an event standpoint, running through an agenda. This is also really a great stat from IACC. It's a 2017 data point that they provided the industry, where 80% of meeting planners report that their job encompasses more experience creation. So experience creation being, it's a lot more than, you need to have a breakfast buffet, a coffee break, a lunch, these sessions, breakouts, keynote. It needs to be a lot more all-encompassing. So we'll get into some tangible examples of that later. But I think it's fantastic to see that 80% of people are saying that this is happening. They're feeling this. So I'm sure a lot of you on the webinar are also feeling that today as well. And I think one of the key things to think about there as we go back to kind of the millennial aspect and technology is really getting in between people. I think the interesting thing to think about there is, people can make a connection really quickly today, right? It's you friend someone on Facebook, you connect with someone on LinkedIn, you follow someone on Twitter, you follow someone on Instagram. It's really fast, really cheap. And so I think one of the important things where experiences come into play is when you have this world where you can connect with someone within seconds and you kind of like quasi know them and you can talk to them immediately, that kind of falls by the wayside in terms of why an event might be important. And it moves more towards the experience and how are they learning and engaging in a way, way deeper level, because they can connect with anyone, anywhere, at any second. So these events need to move into that experience world where you're really deeply engaging with the content, with the people around you. And I think that's where that kind of experience shift comes from. So we'll get into that. So I think this is a great kind of quote that explains maybe the hotel mentality, or ideally this goes on the planner side as well. So this is Steve Ensline. He's a SVP of events at Hyatt Hotels. And I love the idea of, like, choices aren't a luxury, they're an expectation. So people want choices, they want to be able to do things their way. They personalize everything in their lives, and events are no different. So I think this is kind of like a great takeaway where, Steve's thinking about instead of just schoolroom for 200, really think about those 200 people. What are they trying to do, and how can we maybe make a room set or make the environment conducive to what they're trying to pull off? So it's just a little bit of a different way of thinking. It definitely takes more time and energy, which is probably why not everyone's jumping in and doing that, because anytime you're dealing with costs or anything like that, it's obviously difficult to justify. But one of the favorite things that we like to say at Social Tables is if you save $100,000 on $1 million event, that's really great. But if you spend $1 million on an event and it didn't achieve its objective, you just wasted $1 million. So I think that's a great way to kind of think about this and think about what we're trying to do here with kind of these experiences that we're building. So attendees are pushing for purposeful meetings. So what is a purposeful meeting, and what's kind of a tangible example of that? IMEX is a great conference. If you haven't been, or if you've never had a chance to kind of follow them online, I would really suggest it. They do 2 events a year, and they're fantastic. And the theme of their last event was purposeful meetings. And so this kind of goes back to that deeper connection. A lot of health and well-being is starting to work its way into these events. And I know maybe Susanna, you were there at IMEX, right? You got to experience this.
Yeah, it was. I was there, and it was really a lot about like different ways how you can. There were a lot of sessions about meditation, for example, and a lot of how to get better in like not only just meeting there, but feeling well and having good time as well. So it's definitely an experience to be there.
That's fantastic. And what was the general kind of feedback from people? Did people enjoy it? Were people participating? Were people kind of observing? What was the general sentiment?
Yeah, they loved it, honestly. When I was talking to the people, we were a part of Innovation Hub, for example, which were in little igloos. So it kind of looked pretty funny. But people really enjoyed this time. There were many things that they could experience apart from just like the well-being part. They would have little talks at like fireplaces which were created there, so we would have different way of interaction between each other, and the overall feedback was definitely great.
Awesome. Thank you for the on the ground firsthand info there. So that's really good to hear. And not only on the event side. So a good example of maybe a hotel chain and maybe what a hotel could do around this is, a good example is Marriott's Meetings Imagined. They have this fantastic initiative that really helps people look at the kind of the purpose and the goal of a meeting and really build the experience around that. So it's not only on the event organizer. I think it's equally on the venue or the hotel counterpart that's also adding to this overall purposeful meetings, moving things into these deeper experiences. So not just for the planners. So again, we love kind of pulling things out from the industry. So the creative director for the Super Bowl, so I think makes a really, really great point. And this goes to meetings and events that, maybe if it's sales oriented or brand oriented, it works really well. But I think it also works for even any sort of kind of corporate or incentive. Maybe it's a training and people aren't exactly excited about that. But one of the things to think about is that, that's an opportunity for people to buy into the company's brand, right? If you're going somewhere for a training or you're going somewhere for an offsite or a board meeting, that's an opportunity for those people to be more bought into your organization, more aligned with the mission and the vision overall. So it's not just advertising that can benefit from the ability to have this kind of really authentic interaction with the brand. And an event is one of the most amazing ways to do that right there. You're totally immersed. You're surrounded by people. You're surrounded by the topic. And I think it's just like one of the strongest ways, again, in a world where things are cheap and people are pushing ads in front of you everywhere you go. This is, one of those things that can really truly tie people to a brand, whether it's, an internal event or external. So I think that's a great perspective from a purposeful meeting standpoint. And then Janet from Madison College, I think, a lot of people, trinkets and tchotchkes are a very easy way to think about branding or events or what are people's takeaways, what do people remember. But I think as we've seen with events like South by Southwest blowing up and really putting experiential events on the map, it's really about like the people. It's about understanding the attendees, knowing what they're interested in, understanding that whole population, the goal of the attendee, the goal of the event, the city. How do you bring all that together? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's a lot more around people, a lot less around just logistics and getting people to the place. So it's a good reminder from Janet. So I love this next stat. So, right, we're talking about experiences. We're talking about how can you elevate the conversation for an event from just logistics and having the food in the right place at the right time to something more memorable, something that people are really gonna like absorb, take away from, be excited about, be engaged with, and what that's causing, which is backed up by a great report that the Events Industry Council just put out. So the Events Industry Council is an incredible kind of governing body there. I believe they have, maybe over 20 or 30 umbrella organizations that roll up into them. And they just came out with a research study, very, very new, within the past few months, where they had a pretty impressive metric. And that metric was that attendees grew 22% from 2009. So the total number of attendees attending events has grown 22% since 2009, while the number of business meetings has only increased 5%. So I think this is a really, really good data point to prove and kind of show what we're talking about, which is these events are getting larger and more complex. They're not necessarily growing in volume. Obviously that depends on your business and the strategy of your business, where you might particularly be hosting more and more events, and that you might be different than this industry statistic. But I think the industry statistic is so telling that there's not as many events. The events aren't growing as fast as the number of attendees. More and more people are seeking out these events because they are memorable, because they are effective. And I think that's awesome because, everyone was like, oh no, Skype and being able to do meetings online is going to ruin the industry and it won't work as well. And I think that this is like a great metric to show that no, people really still truly believe in that face-to-face experience. And this is a great data point to show that. So keeping that in mind, we're building more complex events with more and more people. So it's actually getting harder to pull off what we're doing every year. So holistic meetings. So Dreamforce is it's a user conference for a software company called Salesforce. They're one of the bigger software companies in the world. Every year they take over San Francisco, and this is a good example, kind of similar to IMEX, where they're doing guided meditation. They're really focused on well-being and interests of their attendees because obviously the information is not as hard to come by these days. You don't have to go to a conference to get the information. You don't have to go to a conference to connect with people. You can do that online quickly. You can read content online quickly. So, thinking about that, Dreamforce took a more holistic approach and where they're really connecting attendees on a deeper level. But that's difficult, right? It's not easy to lead a mass meditation and get all these different players involved to have this experience. So that's where we're talking about the complexity. Another trend, so this is from Greg Oates. He's an editor at Skift. Skift is a great publication. They do some awesome stuff on meetings and events and the general kind of meetings, events, travel, tourism. And one of the trends that he's identified and been talking about for a little while is that meetings are really moving outside of just the ballroom, and they're getting into the city. So there's a few great examples coming up that we'll talk through. But this idea that how do you match your attendees' interests and the goals of your event, and how do you take that and map it to the city that you're going to? And so take that brain trust of the city, take the experts of that city, and map them to the people that are going to be there and connect all those people. That's a really rare, unique opportunity that an event can add tons of value, where, if you're in maybe the biomedical, you might want to be in Boston or something like that. So, okay, now we pick Boston. How do we now engage that community with our attendees to help add more to this event than we could have if we planned it anywhere else? So that's something to think about. So someone chimed in with a question. So Patty, thank you for asking a question. So Patty asked, how do you explain lower attendance for associations? That's a great question. We have a lot of association clients here at Social Tables, and I think my kind of first gut reaction is attendance for associations is probably, I would imagine, I'm not an expert, I would imagine it's probably correlated to just overall membership of associations. So if, I would be curious to know if the attendance is lower, in line with lower people within the association. That would make sense to me. So if less people are joining, less people are going to the events. What would shock me is if more people are joining associations, but less are going to events. So Patty, I don't know if you kind of know that or know that for your own organization, but that's my that's my gut reaction is if less people are joining association, there's less going. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of corporate bodies starting to host these really large events. So, like a Salesforce, they have they have so much money, much more than any, association probably could ever wish to have for the most part. And so they're just taking that over and kind of owning it. So I would imagine there's also competition from an event standpoint. And we'll get to this with what David's going to talk about, but with events being easier to track, they're showing more ROI. When events show more ROI, businesses are more willing to invest in them. So we'll get to that later. And then Patty just answered, she said, yes, membership is down. So yes, I would imagine that membership and kind of the attendance there is correlated. So it's probably very tied to membership and getting membership up to get the attendance there up. So thank you for the question. Okay, so from an experience standpoint, I think one of the things that we're seeing with events is everyone wants to have the coolest, most Instagrammable event out there. So everyone wants to get people to share. And I think that's on both sides, right? So as a property, you want to have shareable, memorable experiences with the property. And as a planner, you want the same shareable, memorable experiences with the event. And I think it's really important for properties and planners to kind of come together and say, hey, we have this unique asset within the city. We have this unique space. We can do these unique things. Let's match that with your goals of your event. Let's match that with your attendees. Let's work together and start thinking, how can we combine what we have, from an event standpoint and a property standpoint to make this really great holistic experience. So something to think about as you're talking to properties, as you're looking at choosing which properties to work with, thinking, okay, well, who's going to work with me on, how to make this a unique experience. And then from a property standpoint, thinking about that when you're working with planners is like, what planner is probably the best fit for your property and who's not a good fit for your property. It's hard to turn away business sometimes, but if your property is really not suited for the type of experience that the planner wants to have, it's important to have that conversation, and that'll build a lot of trust for the next time when it is the right fit. So something to keep in mind about how to join forces there. Right, and so kind of getting to what we had just talked about, properties have to be able to help. So being that expert in a city, helping connect them with local vendors, helping them source, those are all important things. Where a role where a property can play a major part in turning events into true kind of memorable experiences. So something to keep in mind from a property standpoint that that you can really add a lot of value to your customers. Okay, event or enterprise event marketing has some really great information on event technology and showing how it can increase attendance, increase productivity, decrease costs. I'm sure everyone has kind of heard this spiel and thought a lot about it and probably made plenty of ROI cases for how they want to do this within their own business. But I think event technology, again, goes on both sides. So from a planner standpoint, it's probably more well known how you can use event technology, right? You can use, there's registration, there's mobile applications, there's audience engagement. Those are all good ways where you can have tons and tons of impact without having to staff a lot of people, things like that. But on the property side, event technology is, I think, really starting to be invested in pretty heavily. Hyatt's investing in their guest experience management product, which basically makes it so that hotel associates have kind of one place where they can go to get information around guest experiences, which I think is fantastic because those guests are usually your attendees for the event. Marriott has LG Studio, so it's a full service kitchen where chefs prepare food in front of attendees, right? That's a super engaging way for people in that event to network because they have something to look at and talk about. It's not just walking up to a high boy and saying, hi, I'm Trevor, let's network. And so those are kind of really easy ways that what Marriott and Hyatt have done. And Hilton has also rolled out Wow Makers, which is a site that has videos from planners who have pulled off very complex events at Hilton properties. So if you haven't checked that out, some great inspiration there. But it's a great way to show how event technology works both on the planner side and the property side, and something to consider as a planner. Which properties are kind of technology forward. Right. So this is kind of what we've been talking about, and we don't have to dive any deeper. We're about halfway through and not nearly halfway through the slides. So I know I'm already talking fast, but I'm going to talk less and faster. There's kind of 4 areas to focus on that are most important for attendees. So there's some great information, again, referencing back to the same IACC study, where integrating new technology is really, really important for planners because it's not easy and not all technology plays well together. And then probably the reason they want to integrate that technology is for the interaction and collaboration that they want to see happen. And then again, if you want shorter, quicker sessions, and you want that means you need a lot more speakers to manage. It's not easy. You're going to still need technology, that top one. And then the emphasis on creativity and locality. That's like the creative aspect, right? That, technology might be able to help, but more importantly, that's if you're using technology to cut down on all the stuff that takes a lot of your time, you have more time to think, more time to do that creative piece. So I think all these are really kind of tightly tied together and good to think about. So again, personalized experiences, that's kind of what we've been talking about throughout the day. But one of the things that we want to start talking more about here, and where Susanna is going to help out, is the kind of this idea of personalized experiences through technology. So Susanna, when it comes to kind of what you all are seeing, how are people using different technologies to kind of create these unique environments where attendees are very, very actively engaged in what's going on?
Thanks for my space. So here, what we've seen is that some of the event organizers decided to give full control of what is going to be discussed in the session, for example. So we have seen that they would allow audience to vote for their interests. I was at a conference in Toronto, Canada, which was a finance conference, very heavily technical finance conference. And the organizer of a session decided that they would ask the audience what they want to talk about. They had about 6 topics ready to talk, and they just allowed the people to vote for what they want to do. And so then the discussion is a bit different. It's not only about what the organizer wants, but they're listening to their to the participants, for example. Or they would even allow the people to build the agenda according to the preferences. So they would say, like, these are the most important things that we want to talk about, and they would just like switch the agenda. It does take courage for sure, but definitely the outcome was amazing.
That's incredible. And so maybe you don't know this, but it's just the first thing that popped in my head is how are planners kind of working with their speakers and the people that need to be able to deliver this content? Because that seems like that would be kind of difficult, right? Where if the audience is moving things around and shifting things, speakers have to be really flexible as well. So is that something that your planners are kind of juggling as they're doing all this?
For sure, they have to have the speakers on board with this, as well as moderator. I do believe that moderator is the person who can deliver things the best way. And then if you don't have the moderator, I believe this is the most underestimated person in the whole events industry. Even if you have your ROI, like if you don't have moderator on board, or like whatever you want to get out of the conference, if the moderator doesn't know this, like you might not even get there. So like, yes, definitely the speakers have to be on board for sure.
That's so true. And yeah, it is. And from a moderator standpoint, they have to really realize that the job, the classic job of a moderator on a panel is you're the moderator, you get all your friends, and you kind of ask questions that you might already know the answer to. But I think the engagement piece of it from a moderator standpoint makes that such a critical component. Are you seeing people hiring professional moderators, or are you seeing people just really kind of prep their moderators, or maybe moderators are the ones bringing the technology to the conversation? How does it usually work?
Yeah, thanks. So for sure, this is like our first comment that we say, like even if the organizers or event planners want to use Slido, the first thing we say is like we need to get moderators on board, because even if there's AV or I don't know, like somebody who is on board, like everybody else is on board with your whole staff, but the moderator doesn't know how to deliver information about technology, any kind of technology, or about like the moderator doesn't know anything about your goals, about like what you want to encourage, or like how you want to change. You want to, I don't know, like let's say you want to start being more interactive with the audience and so on, or you know that the audience is a bit, stubborn, doesn't want to do something, and you kind of want to try something new, you need to have the moderator on board. So this is people
Mm-hmm.
are trying to. I believe that the people start to, or planners start to think about the fact that the professional moderators are needed. They're important.
Mm-hmm.
There are people in the market who are actually focusing on this. I hope there will be more, and I hope that every single conference will have their own professional moderator. And I think this is a way how they can actually get new things in place, like technology.
Yeah. Okay. So that sparked kind of two things. So Heather said yes, I agree. So she's on board. So thank you so
Good.
much for that, Heather. And then Anthony asked, do planners want increased involvement from the AV production company in the planning process? So that's a great question. So right, we're talking about a speaker, we're talking about the audience. How does all of kind of what you're talking about play in with the AV aspect? Is there certain kind of specifications that need to be met there, or can it all be handled by your kind of normal AV?
AV to me is definitely on, like, it's one of the stakeholders. Even if we discuss things with the planners and the AV doesn't understand what the technology is supposed to do, or like what's the official plan and so on. Even if you like, I'm talking about any kind of technology that is being used during let's say during the sessions, or during like whatever your agenda is. AV needs to be on board. So the more we see conferences, for example, at South by Southwest, when we were there, we
Mm-hmm.
had to have like a proper talk with the AV, so that they understand like what's the thing, how Slido is going to work, how speakers
Mm-hmm.
can use it. So it can't be just like something super new for them that they have never seen and they don't know how to operate with it, because they are there to help get everything in place, all the technical stuff. And if they don't know anything about the technology that is being used, how are they going to help? So definitely bringing AV on. If you have a producer, definitely get producer on board with your technology.
Perfect. So Heather responded again. She said, yes, that's helpful. She said, you want to have everything synced. You want to have that plan, scripted, run a show, and they have to know in advance what's going on from lighting to music when people get up and leave and enter the stage. So definitely you want to be in line, in sync with your AV providers. And
Yeah.
and then it looks like, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce her name. Anka, she said, you definitely have to be working with your AV providers, and they have to understand the technology that you're using. So definitely agrees there. And then Anthony said we answered his question, so I'm glad we answered your question. Awesome. We're going to move on to the next slide. So that was a great session that we deep dived a little bit. So the next one is we talk about journey maps, and Experiential is a great company that has kind of really pushed this forward in the events industry, creating journey maps around the different personas attending an event. So if you don't know what a journey map is, it's kind of, if you take a specific person that's going to attend your event, maybe there's 5 different types of attendees, you really want to map out start to finish, how you can create the best experience for those people. So Susanna, is there an element of kind of this journey mapping or personas that comes into play when you're talking about or thinking about kind of audience engagement and things like that?
Oh, definitely. So, for example, imagine that you have, I'm right now working on a conference that is focused for ministers and governments and people from, like this type of, like this industry. And, these people are very much used to do their Q&As through microphones. And then you have some kind of people who are kind of higher in the whole hierarchy and they have more space. And then people who are, like not that much space. And then you can't come up with these people and tell them, everybody use Slido, stop using the mic, you definitely have to know who your audience is. And sometimes you as the planner, you might not know the audience, but the client or whoever you are actually setting the conference with, that person definitely knows their audience, so they know what the
Mm-hmm.
industry is and who are the people who are coming and who is the targeted group that you want to do. So this is all that actually heavily impacts your whole agenda and how you actually try to use the technology, because like if we are talking about millennials, definitely use as much technology as you can, because I believe that they can handle it, not, of course, not too much, but if we're talking about people who are very, let's say conservative and like very, like they're not that happy about all the technology stuff, then don't make it too big for them or overwhelming. Yeah. So definitely.
Perfect. And then let's talk a little bit about live polling, crowdsourcing pieces of the agenda. So tell us a little bit about what happened at Open 2017.
Oh, honestly, this is fun, but I was not there. To be honest.
Okay.
That's kind of sorry for that. But regarding the live polling, I just wanted to mention that this is a great tool how you can actually figure out like who is in the audience, what is the important thing for them, how they can. And actually, this was the same thing that I said before. They let the organizers let the delegates propose sessions they wanted to see and vote on them. You can do that in bigger sessions. You can do that in smaller sessions, and then just we do it also internally where we crowdsource what are the sessions that we want to discuss. Even though we have more people ready to deliver the speeches, we just decide to do the top 3, and then you're 100% sure that the people are going to be happy about them because this is what they actually want.
Got it. Awesome. So that was kind of our deep dive into some of the audience engagement and personalization and some kind of real world examples of how you could take an event and really start to make the content dynamic and the content personalized and like up to the second personalized, right? You're asking attendees to give you feedback very quickly in real time and making decisions for them, which is an incredible experience. Obviously difficult to pull off, maybe a little bit scary, but I think, hopefully from hearing Susanna's different case studies and ways that people have done it in the past, I think it should be obvious that it's very possible and something that is happening all around you. So something that you might want to test out on a small scale and maybe move it into a larger scale as you sort of perfect it. Like Susanna said, having moderators on board is important. Having speakers on board is important. So I know it's not easy to do immediately, but it could be a goal to build up to and slowly work your way towards. So I hope you really enjoyed that section. And the kind of the next section that we're going to talk through is going to be a lot of case studies. And we're going to talk a lot about the interaction, engagement, collaboration. And I want to make sure we talk a lot about measurement. So I'm going to go really fast through these. So if you're interested in any of them, please Google them, take a deeper dive, but we're just going to touch at a really high level. So here we go. A company called Your Membership created an entire kind of Harry Potter inspired themed world where everything was gamified and everything from interactions to meeting vendors to going to sessions, racking up points, all sorts of cool stuff. But gamification, great way to make something experiential, great way to get people to engage throughout the event that you're creating. So obviously thinking about gamification is important when it comes to what we're talking about. Breakouts. So a really cool thing that MPI did, I love the events that MPI holds, they're always so well thought out. One of the cool things is super simple, not difficult to do, not even expensive. They had a snowball fight to kick off and engage in a session. Wasn't a real snowball fight. They had people write down questions or ideas or thoughts or conversation points, crumble them up on a piece of paper, and then throw them so that people could pick them up and use them on stage and understand, like, okay, this is what the audience wanted. So it's like if you don't want to use a mobile app, you can always start a snowball fight in your conference. So something to think about. Another great thing, IMEX, again, a lot of their content is fantastic. They have hot topic tables. It allows attendees to go into, smaller working groups that are moderated. So again, back to kind of what Susanna said, having moderators at your disposal is really important to make a lot of this stuff happen. But the idea that small conversations at a table, don't be afraid to get people away from the stage, away from listening to one person and having a conversation. The majority of the talent and the ideas are going to be out in the audience anyway, so it's good to get those collaborating. This one's incredibly unique and so cool. Adobe, they had a great conference where they used silent disco technology. So it's basically headphones that you can put specific kind of frequencies on and you can listen to different people. So let's say you have a really small space that you're working with and you want to have 4 sessions going on at one time and you have no air walls and it's one big open space. Put on silent disco headphones. Everyone can walk around, listen to the different speakers, tune in, tune out. Very interesting. Such a cool way to get people engaged and up and moving around. So getting creative with space is obviously an important part of all this. So again, IMEX, they have campfires, a great way, small on the floor sessions. They have things happening at lunch, things that are live and you can engage with and move around between. They have research pods. So these are, again, small groups around specific topics. They have a playroom. You can learn through engagement and activity. These are all great case studies to kind of think about and use. I'm going fast, but again, IMEX, they had spaces for people to check out. So yes, you want to engage them and stimulate them and have short sessions, but that could drive you crazy at some point. So giving people that way to get out of that, grab a massage, do guided meditation, think about wellness, and make sure that wellness is built in and it's available for people so that they're not totally inundated with overstimulation and have to just exit the event. So something to think about. Again, the venues, we talked about this. Venues are getting very interesting and different. This particular event, it was a TEDx event, so those are always kind of forward thinking. They held it at an indoor rock climbing facility. They had large pillow chairs, very relaxed, obviously a great way to take in information. No doubt, I'm sure every single planner out there is thinking, holy cow, all the liability of someone climbing on one of those things and falling off. I don't know how they pulled that off. Maybe reach out to the planner and find out, because I'm thinking the same thing. And then, so obviously a great way to do all this is you have to be able to map out the space. You have to understand and collaborate on the different designs. So this is a lot of what Social Tables helps people do. A lot of people use us for this functionality. If you want to go to a unique venue and you want to have a unique setup, it's very hard to be able to accurately do that. So Social Tables gives people a way to do that with, you know, these collaborative diagrams that would allow you to execute that type of event. So if you need help or tools to do that, Social Tables is one way that you could pull it off. Again, these are cool ideas of ways to get out of the hotel ballroom. We talked about this in the past. These are some of the case studies that are going to point to that. So getting people out of the ballroom, and a great example is Forbes had a under 30 summit. And what they actually did was they knew, okay, some people are going to explore the city on their own, but if we can create ways for people to engage with each other, engage with the content, and have a great time exploring the city all at the same time, that is the ideal way to do it. So they actually had sessions where you could go play basketball with a former NBA player while you're exploring a different part of the city and understanding what's going on there. They had like multiple different stations like that people could go to based on their interest to learn about the city and still be engaging with the content. So such a creative way to do it. Smaller groups, but still more engaging in what people are interested in. Destination-based events, obviously we know how much the destination impacts what's going on, but kind of thinking back to earlier what we talked about, matching your audience and the goal of the program with the destination is something that I think all teams should be focusing on and doing at this point. So we've talked about that. Along with that, incorporating local spaces and suppliers, so not only helping people see different parts of the city, but getting your local city and community involved. That has a major event impact. Working with the CVB is an awesome way to do that. They can point you in the direction of all the great local places on a smaller scale, smaller vendors, if that's something that you want to do in terms of having a local impact with your event as well. Okay, so this is like a quick story that I love to tell, but I think it really encapsulates what we're talking about today, and that's this idea of like a purple cow. You want your event to be a purple cow, and so what do I mean by that? So if you will, bear with me as I try to visualize something with you. So imagine you're driving down a country road, and it's a beautiful day out, kind of windows down. You're driving past a cow pasture, and most people 9 out of 10 would just keep driving. They would never think twice. They would never remember that, and they would just kind of go on with their lives. Now imagine the exact same scene. You're driving down the same country road. You're driving past that same cow pasture, and one of those cows is bright purple, and just think about what you would do. Like, what would you do if you drove past a cow pasture that had a bright purple cow in it? Most people would stop their car immediately. They would jump out. They would take pictures. They would put it on social media. They would share it with all their friends. They would tell anyone that they could talk to while they were driving on the phone. They would probably tell that story for the rest of their lives. And I think when we're talking about experiences, we're really trying to make that purple cow experience for people, because that's how you get to amplify what's going on and build that connection. So something to think about, we talk about it a lot at Social Tables, is we want to do purple cow marketing. We want to do things that are memorable, that people want to capture and talk about into the future. And I think the same thing applies to events. So that gets us into the world of measuring success. And I was trying to talk super fast to make sure we get to David's slides, because they're really important and really unique content. It's actually like Visibo proprietary data, which I'm excited for you all to see. So we're going to talk about experiences and sharing and how you measure all that. So getting into some numbers about what that looks like. a third of people say they would post about an experience, a third of attendees take videos and photos during the experience, and 70% share with family and peers. So that's something to think about when you're creating an event, is people want to share all this, and are you giving them a way to do that, and are you measuring whether or not they're doing that? So a really simple way, kind of nothing new here in the world, but an easy thing is being able to track hashtags, incentivizing people to use it. That's something that I'm sure you might already be doing, because it's not horribly detailed, and you might not need anything special for that. But what we're going to talk about with David is how events are more measurable than ever. So David, do you want to kind of give us a quick primer on how to think about how events are measurable, the different aspects that they're measurable, maybe an overview of what we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides?
Yes, thanks. As Trevor mentioned, there's a need, right, to create unique events, and I think everyone in attendance understands that, regardless of where you're coming from, be it a venue or an organizer or an AV company. But the question is, how do we, first of all, measure the impact of these unique experiences? And second, how do we communicate the success of an event to other stakeholders? So Trevor early on used Dreamforce as an example of a company that is able to essentially invest heavily in their event, and as a result, they can create a Purple Cow experience for, I think it's something like 100,000 attendees every year, so much so that we all reference it as a kind of cornerstone of what it means to create something unique. How did they do that? Well, of course, one, they have just a lot of capital on hand, but it's not just about having a big market cap. It's about it's about proving that these kind of experiences work, and then scaling that over time so that you can allocate more budget and earn that from other, from the people within your organization or your client's organization that control the budget. So what I'm going to show you are a few different methodologies that you can use that are very simple to do exactly that, to measure experience. So first, let's talk about this research that Trevor mentioned. So for context, what Bizzabo did, we surveyed around 500 senior event organizers and marketers from the a kind of a representative sample of organizations across different industries. The first one question we asked them was, do you expect your budget for event technology will increase in the next year? And we asked them, if yes, how much do you expect it will increase? So the first thing I'm trying to explain here is that companies, one question we asked the respondents was, overall, how is your company performing? And there could be three buckets: underperforming, performing as expected, and overperforming. And what we see here is that the overperformers are much more likely to invest in event technology compared to those who are underperforming. And both categories who said, yes, we are expecting our budget for event tech to increase, the overperformers expected that they will be able to invest about $3,000 or $4,000 more. So anyway, that's something that's interesting, and have this in your mind as we go on, that essentially, look, you don't need to invest a lot in event technology, but companies that are willing to do this are often more successful in planning their events and overall. So if we go on, okay, so looking at the kind of tools that these organizations are using, again, and this is in context to help you understand what your event stack should be in order to be successful. We see that overperformers are more frequently using event management software, marketing automation software, and a sales CRM. And again, when you're thinking about how am I going to measure event success or ROI or attribute this, it's going to vary depending on what your goals are, and we'll get into that in a moment. But these are essentially what you could consider the building blocks if you're working with an organization that's focused on generating some sort of business outcome from an event, be it revenue or retention or even driving an event series that's successful year over year. These are kind of the tools that you might need in your toolbox, and these are the tools we see used by organizations that are more successful on the whole. Okay, so moving on again, and this will be the final piece of the data. So we asked everyone, are you able to measure event ROI? And essentially what we found was, again, overperformers said that yes, or the question was actually, do you have trouble proving event ROI? And overperformers said no, we don't have trouble proving ROI. Another way to say this is just, yes, we can prove ROI much more frequently than those who are underperformers. And if we look at these three questions as a whole, what we see, the story that we see, is that overperformers that invest more in these tech solutions and use this take this approach of building an event technology stack of different tools that integrate with one another, as a result of this, are more able to measure ROI. And then you can, of course, extrapolate that and assume that if they're able to do this and they're overall more successful organizations, they're probably creating events that are unique and somehow have a purple cow element to them. Anyway, so that's just a bit of context before we get into how do we do this. So the first thing is event attribution. I'm sure some of you have heard of this term. Essentially, how do you attribute the impact of your event to whatever your goals might be? And there are, companies that do specifically attribution. They can be quite expensive. Of course, they can be effective, but you really have to have the bandwidth to manage these tools. If you're really looking to get into like super sophistication with attribution, Bizible, which is not Bizibo, Bizible, is a company that I've heard is very good. We haven't used them ourselves, but that's an aside. So if we look at attribution from a high level, we think of it as a funnel. At least most marketers do, and often marketers are involved in planning these kind of events. So usually the model for attribution, when it's coming to creating an event that's focused on generating leads, is what we call a first touch model, which is essentially the first element that a customer or that a contact interacted with receives 100% of the credit for becoming a lead, and eventually, let's say they become a customer or they become an event attendee, whatever that end goal is in blue at the bottom. The first action that takes them from an anonymous person to a known contact is fully attributed in most cases. But for event organizers who are planning events often to nurture existing contacts or association organizers who are looking, again, to build better relationships with their members and encourage those members to renew or invite new people to the association, that first touch model doesn't work. And that's where we go to full funnel measurement. And this is really what a more sophisticated way of doing attribution looks like. And the point of this, me even bringing this up, is for people in the audience to begin recognizing that you can work with your client or other or stakeholders within your organization to begin weighting the impact of these events more evenly, and to begin thinking of events as a central player in accelerating or developing attendee, customer, or prospect relationships over time. So here, this is a model where rather than crediting the first conversion only 100% of the time, or with 100% of the credit, you spread it more evenly. So essentially you can give, for example, 10% to these mid-funnel steps, or to a final step in the funnel before the lead or contact takes that final action. Again, so in so doing, if you have a more sophisticated attribution model, you can then prove to your stakeholders, hey, this event actually is responsible for this much in revenue, or for this many customers or contacts taking this final step, whereas a less sophisticated model might not be able to give you that ability. And then if we move on again, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, so just a quick time check for you, David. Are you okay to run over a little bit?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, so for anyone that's on, where I know we're getting close to the time, and we're gonna kind of keep rolling through to make sure we finish out the information. So if you have the few extra minutes, we're gonna keep going. So awesome, great. I just want to check in on that, and we'll keep moving.
Yeah, I think we'll need like 4 minutes, and we'll be all set. Okay.
Awesome.
So. But how do we measure event ROI? So that's attribution, and that's one component. But another measurable is basically return? Did the event achieve your unique goals? And first, you need to recognize that your event should have probably one or two primary goals that will make measuring things much easier. And that might mean some tough conversations with stakeholders to really clarify, what are you trying to achieve? Why are you planning this event? Of course, there are a bunch of different outcomes that might be relevant for you, from building a sales pipeline, so nurturing leads to become more qualified for sales conversations, to generating brand awareness, or maximizing attendee satisfaction, something that I would assume would be super relevant for associations, for example, or internal meetings or events. Of course, driving event revenue. So if you're interested in organizing events and generating actual revenue on the event registrations, then clearly that's going to be a big one. Or driving partner revenue. So if you have exhibitors or sponsors, you want to make sure they're having an excellent experience so that you're building long-term relationships with them. And of course, you're turning a profit through that partnership. So you want to identify those goals. And then once you do that, I'll explain a few different kind of methodologies you could apply. So let's take the first one, focusing on the sales pipeline. So this is a screenshot from a tool called Salesforce. They plan Dreamforce, and this is one of the tools that we identified are in most overperforming organizations' event tech stack. So a CRM essentially allows sales teams to track relationships with their prospects and customers, and you can use a tool like this, especially if you're piping in the event data from a tool that, where you manage the event contacts and the event registration process. You can integrate that data with a CRM using an open API or even a Zapier integration, or it's quite simple to do actually. And in so doing, you can quickly pull reports related to things like how many leads were generated from the event that are tagged with the event name, how many customers were acquired, how long did it take for these leads to close. So one option is maybe you're not generating more revenue, but the leads are closing faster. So you can use a CRM to do that. If we move on, just speeding through quickly, another thing that Trevor mentioned earlier, again, is you want to create conversations. You want to create Purple Cow experiences that cause people to share and talk about your event online and amplify your brand and your event. So one simple thing you could do is simply monitor the historic social media mentions and engagement your brand gets over time, and then look to see if there was a spike generated within the days leading up to or after the event, which you can then easily associate. So essentially you're looking for a delta where these kind of mentions or engagements are considerably higher than they might be on average. And you can use any social media monitoring tool to do this, or a marketing automation tool that integrates with social networks. And then if we go on again, so attendee satisfaction, it's one of the primary KPIs for most event organizers. And today, thanks to technology, you can pretty easily measure attendee satisfaction. So one option is just looking at attendee engagement. So this is an example of Bizzabo. We're an all-in-one solution. One of the offerings within the all-in-one is an event app, and we allow you to measure different actions that an attendee takes within the app, and you can then correlate that to whether or not they're really engaging with your event. They're looking at the agenda, the speaker pages, if they're messaging one another, and so on. And it's not just us. This is something you can do with whatever, or with many other event apps out there. It's just a matter of how difficult that might be to set up originally, but it can be done. And then another even simpler option is simply NPS scores, which is basically a net promoter score on a scale of 1 to 10. How likely are you to recommend this event to a friend or colleague? And you can Google NPS scores and see more how to do that. But again, that's a good way to benchmark yourself, and you can then segment attendee answers based on where they're coming from, etc. And then finally, if we go to the next one, so looking at cross-event performance. So this is a new thing that Bizzabo rolled out, and it can be done in spreadsheets or a CRM even, but basically looking at how did this event perform compared to others. And if you treat your events kind of like science experiments and experiment with the event format or different parts of the event to kind of create a unique value proposition for each one, you may be able to then benchmark yourself and compare event performance across events to see what changes you initiated in one event may have been responsible for better registration numbers or more revenue, etc. Cool.
Wow, so that was a lot of ways to measure engagement across kind of different metrics, across different goals. How is your team seeing customers manage to piece all this together? Are they still putting it into Excel? Are they putting it into, how are they taking the different kind of like the goals and the different platforms and making sense of it all?
Yeah, so great question. We're usually seeing one of two options. One is if they're using Bizzabo, then we're giving them all of these kind of tools within the platform. So they're often using us to do these kind of things around engagement or cross-event analytics, or simply just building a dashboard that allows them to determine if they're on track to hit their goals. Alternatively, they're integrating Bizzabo with another tool within the stack. So the most common integration that we see, and I think it speaks to the industry as a whole, not just to our user base, is integrating with the CRM, because the CRM is increasingly, the kind of source of truth for most businesses. And then more sophisticated organizations will pipe that data either directly from their event management software, which is the space that Bizzabo operates in, or from the CRM into this thing called a data warehouse. And then they'll visualize it with a tool like Tableau or Looker. That's if you're getting very sophisticated. But essentially, it's a spectrum from using one tool to do all of your reporting to piping the data and kind of stitching it together and looking at it more broadly. We don't see people using spreadsheets as much. I recommend people use spreadsheets when they're just getting started, because you'll really understand where you want to be measuring. Probably because you'll stumble across a roadblock, and then that will motivate you to potentially find a solution for that, which would lead you into a more automated mode of reporting.
Got it. And so which parts of this kind of overall funnel and process does Bizzabo handle kind of cohesively that you wouldn't have to put into another system?
Yeah, good question. So everything that we mentioned in this section, we can actually do, with the exception of looking at sales pipeline and time to close and lead generation. That's where the idea of integrating with Salesforce or another CRM really makes sense. But if you're looking for things related to event revenue or ROI or social media mentions or cross-event analytics, we handle all of that stuff.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. Well, I think that kind of wraps up our section on reporting, and so thank you very much, David. Appreciate that. And we are. I think one of the key things when it comes to metrics is you kind of have to pull that information, right? So some of that's out there. You're getting that information, but it's also good to map that with surveys. Get insights, reach out to people after the event, get that qualitative feedback. NPS is a great example that David talked about, but it's important to get the hard metrics, how many people attended, how much money did we make, but it's also good to kind of get the softer ones, where that's usually where you find the insights. It's a lot harder to go through, right? You're kind of picking through what people wrote down in a sentence, which is harder than a spreadsheet or an Excel file. But there's so much good stuff in there that'll help you, figure out which part of the experience landed, right? If people say, hey, I really didn't like the beanbag chairs because, X, Y, and Z, I couldn't get out of them, or I fell asleep in them. Or if someone says, hey, the lunch was great, but it was like, we were moving too many stations and it took too long and I didn't get to talk to anyone. So I think one of the things to keep in mind as we're all kind of thinking about what we talked about today is, if you're going to try some of this new stuff, you're going to be putting new things in place, it's really important to get feedback more so than just kind of out in the event, hey, how did you like that face to face? Because most people are going to default and say it was great. You'll have a couple people out there that are going to give you the truth, but I think through MPS, and you can even do small incentives, offering gift cards and things like that for people to respond. So something to consider. If you want to try new things, I'd highly recommend making sure that you have something set up to measure all the feedback from that. So, okay, well, we are a little bit over, but hopefully that was everyone feels that it was worth it because the content was great. I think that today went unbelievably well. So I want to thank Susanna and David. I want to thank you guys so much for joining on board to kind of help everyone understand the importance of, from the engagement to the analytics and reporting and how all that comes together. So I think, I think you both did an awesome job. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Trevor, and thanks to Social Tables.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And so, thank you. Yeah, and so just so everyone knows, we're going to send out a recording of this. So when I was speed talking and flying through stuff, you'll be able to go back and kind of see anything that we kind of glazed over really quickly. You can share it with your team. So you'll get that via email from us, the full recording, and you'll have access to it, view it as much as you'd like, share it as much as you'd like. So hopefully if there's anything that you didn't get to jot down during the presentation, you'll be able to see it. So that is it for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining, and hopefully see you next time. And also, if you enjoyed this webinar, Slido, you can see the website right there below Susanna's picture. They do a lot of great webinars as well, and so does Bizzabo with David. So if this is interesting to you, you're going to be able to find a lot more great stuff. Add it to kind of your regular education to be able to kind of sign up for a few of those webinars, hop on the email list, and make sure you don't miss them, because both of those companies are doing great webinars as well. So if you enjoyed this, you'll definitely enjoy theirs as well. So I would say take a look if you can, and hopefully we'll see you next time. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day, and have a great weekend.